Folks. This is the second part of Lecture 6, and this is about collision testing. So how do we test if something within our Unity world has collided with something else? And obviously we could do all sorts of things if something collides with something else, but in order to demonstrate this concept, I'm going to show you how to play a sound if a collision happens. So suppose we want to test if the player has collided with something, or indeed if any object has collided with some other object. In order to test for collisions, a game object needs to have a collider component associated with it. And I think most game objects already have colliders on them. If not, you can add it. And one of the objects involved in the collision has to have a rigid body component on it. Now, rigid body components are the things that drive the physics system. And by attaching a rigid body component to something, you're basically saying that you now want it to be under the control of the physics system in Unity. So the first-person controller already has a rigid body component, and that's why it responds to gravity and things like this. And this is what the rigid body component looks like. You can see we can set the mass, which in layman's terms is like the weight. We can indicate whether it responds to gravity or not, and we can set some other parameters and so on as well. So attaching a rigid body to an object means it will now obey the laws of physics. It'll fall due to gravity and things like that. So let's try this out. I'm going back to the Unity scene that we were looking at before, and we have this cube object over here. I've taken the audio source component off it for the moment. And I'm going to move it up a little bit, and actually maybe I'll rotate it a little like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rigid body component, which is physics rigid body down here. The mass is 1. I'm going to change that, make it a little bit lighter, so it's 0.5, and then I'm going to run it, and let's see what happens. Where is it? There it is. So you'll see that this guy is now fallen down onto the ground. And if I walk up to it and bash into it, I can kind of knock it around the place like so. Okay, so it's now responding to physics. It's part of the physics system. So, how do we detect collisions or get it to do things in response to collisions? Well, this is where we need a little bit of scripting. So as long as one of our bodies, our potentially colliding bodies, is a rigid body, we can test for collisions as follows. So it's a matter of adding a script to the object that contains a function called onCollisionEnter. And again, this is one of Unity's built-in functions, and they will automatically trigger if the object that this is attached to collides with something. So in here, we can put any kind of code we want. In other words, whatever we want to happen in response to the collision. So, suppose we want to get it to play a sound in response to a collision. So that means we now need a little bit of code that will trigger a sound. So how do you do that? Well, we play a sound from a script as follows. The first thing is, at the top of the script, we need to set up what is effectively a variable, or technically speaking, it's an object, called of type audio clip. And this is, you can think of this as a variable that holds a sound, as opposed to something like an integer variable that holds a number. This is an audio variable that holds a sound. So it is called myClip, and it is of type audio clip, and it is public, which means we're going to be able to access it from outside the script. So within the start function, I'm going to show you a complete example of this script in a moment, we put in this line of code. And essentially what this says is, find the audio source component in the object and set it to myClip. Now, because myClip was a public variable within the script, it means it will then become visible within the Unity interface, which means we can just drag a sound file into that field for this script. And that means automatically the audio source component will be set to this, whatever is put into this, which corresponds to whatever is placed within the interface here. Now, once that has happened, we can play the sound with this line of code, which essentially says play whatever sound is linked to the audio source component. So I've got a script called collisiontesting.cs. This is on Moodle, so you can just grab it from there and try it out. So let me show this to you. Okay, so this is the collisiontesting.cs script. Again, we've got the usual bunch of stuff up the top that you can ignore. The script is called collision testing. Right? It sets up the audio clip called myClip here. It's got a start function that sets the audio source component to myClip. It's got an update function. There's nothing inside this because there's nothing that we actually wanted to do at every frame. But then it's also got this onCollisionEnter function. And this basically means if the object that this script is attached to collides with anything, then run this line of code. And what this line of code does is just play the audio file that's been linked in through myClip here. Okay, so we can have a look at this in action by going back to Unity. Okay, so here is my scene again. I've made a folder called scripts, and I downloaded the collisiontesting.cs file from Moodle, and then I added it as an asset in the normal manner. Now, I am going to start by attaching this script to that cube object, which is up here. Okay, so we should see the script appearing in the inspector now. Yes, here it is, here it is. And the first thing I have to do is I have to put something into this myClip field here. So I think I can just click on this and then find my beep sound again. And there we go. Now, this thing also needs a collider, which it has, and then it also needs a rigid body component. I've already added the rigid body component here. In fact, we did it a few minutes ago. So the one other thing it needs is the audio source component, as we've seen already. Now, I don't have to link in the audio clip here because that's going to happen automatically through the script. I'm going to turn off play on awake because I don't need that to happen either. So let's see what happens if I play. Okay, we heard a beeping sound, and what happened there is that when that cube fell out of the air and hit the ground, that registered as a collision. So that's why I played the beep. However, if I run up to it with my first-person controller, crash into it, it beeps again. Let's try it again. There we go. Okay, so every time it registers a collision, it plays the beeping sound. Now, there are lots of other things that we could do in response to collisions. So what I'm just testing here is the concept that we can do something in response to a collision. And in that case, it's play a sound. Okay, so that concludes this section. We move on to the next part in the third little video.